For years, we have been telling Hollywood that if you go woke, well, you know what will happen. Broke is on the way. Folks, we are there today. A historically bad Memorial Day weekend has been absolutely disastrous, and finally, the folks at Hollywood are beginning to panic and realize we've been trying to lead them into the healthy, sustainable way all along. We'll tell you why this is finally the moment of change right now. Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Pro Channel. We are so happy to have you on the flip side of the Memorial Day weekend. And folks, we want to thank you so much for continuing to visit the channel, even though we ran highlight videos over the weekend. It was the first time I'd had a break since back around Christmas and New Year's, and we just want to thank you for your support so much. We also want to be very thankful that Culture Casino joins us yet again. Sir, how have you been?
Oh, I'm fantastic. I had a wonderful weekend, unlike theater owners.
That's right. And, Culture, one of the things that we need to emphasize heavily, because we're in sort of that stage where we're the partner in this who's been saying the truth all along, and it's very easy to say, we told you so. I'm more interested in saving the theaters than I am in saying I told you so, frankly, because I think the theaters actually could go down. I think the entire cinema ecosystem could collapse over the next year. And that's a serious problem. Folks, let's dive in right now to just how bad this is. And we take no joy in this, but they have disrupted heavily the consumer cycle of going to see movies. And they did that by producing content that was so outside the spectrum of what families wanted and what folks wanted to see, that now people are out of the habit of going to go see movies in theaters, period. And I don't think it's any better in streaming. We're going to talk about all that in just a moment, as well as why Hollywood might actually be at the edge of non-existence, given that artificial intelligence could be coming and disrupt everything. Rebecca Rubin is the author of this article. Box office Furiosa just barely beats the Garfield movie in disastrous Memorial Day weekend, the worst in decades. Culture, this is the worst. This isn't the worst in decades, and we'll explain why in just a moment. Garfield has another reason to hate Mondays. Although, folks, Garfield actually, that one's not a disaster. We'll explain. In a box office nail-biter, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, narrowly emerged victorious over the Garfield movie on North American charts. On Sunday, Warner Brothers and Sony both claimed its own movie ranked number one with roughly 25 million over the weekend and an estimated 31 million through the Memorial Day holiday on Monday. With Monday's estimates, Furiosa ended up generating $26.2 million over the weekend and $32 million for the 4 days. Garfield was shockingly close behind with $24 million over the weekend and $31.1 million over the 4 days. No matter the final order, it's the worst Memorial Day weekend in nearly 3 decades. Of course, excluding the one in which all theaters were closed due to the pandemic. Box office comparisons to the same holiday weekend in 2023 are particularly tough, down by nearly 36%, given that Disney's The Little Mermaid remake took the crown with $118 million, one of the best debuts for the holiday. Note that The Little Mermaid, the live-action remake, ended up being a flop and may have been a contributing factor to folks not wanting to go see movies anymore. So there you go. That's fun. Overall, this Memorial Day stretch adds to Hollywood's summer woes as ticket sales remain 22% behind 2023 and a concerning 41% behind 2019, according to ComScore. Culture is that 41% behind normal, because 2019 was the last normal.
Right.
It's the 41% behind that's terrifying, because inflation also means that it's far more expensive to keep these theaters operating. So it might as well be 60% behind in terms of, comparison to inflation. And what that means is that I don't see how theaters can stay open much longer. Also, Culture, what I would very much like for you to expose to the audience is, why is this the worst Memorial Day weekend ever? Not just the worst in 3 decades, but flat out the worst, particularly due to inflation. Can you share with us?
Well, again, when you look at the inflation factor here, you understand that the ticket prices and everything else going into the Temple of Doom, which was the film that they were saying was one of the lowest times ever, that that kind of an opening weekend was not that bad back at that point in time. In fact, it was actually pretty decent. We're miles behind in comparison to the number of tickets that are sold. When you look at overall ticket sales, there are far fewer people in the theaters going to see these films, and that's actually even more telling than the box office returns, because it costs an awful lot of money to maintain these theaters the way that they are. In fact, at my local theater, when I went to go see Furiosa, they had 4 of the theaters walled off. There was nothing showing in there. So not only is there not only is there a dearth of films out there and content out there to put in the theaters, you have to cut your labor costs in maintaining those empty boxes. And mind you, these are not small theater rooms. These are, somewhere between 300 and 500 seat theaters they're shutting off. That's how bad things are. They pulled out 2 of the alternate concession stands at my multiplex that I go to regularly. Now I go to many different theater locations, but the one that I am frequently at is down to just a main concession stand and an adult beverage location, a bar. So the theaters survive on concessions because that 50% take that they get from, and depending upon the contract, of course, that they've negotiated with the studios, the distributors, but that isn't going to keep theaters alive. It's the concessions. And now, they're cutting out concession service and, 2 out of 3 locations in the theater. This is bad. But as far as the adjustment for inflation, it wasn't very expensive to go to a theater and to enjoy a popcorn with your family, et cetera, et cetera. You at that point in time, I mean, we were still in line with, the idea of reasonable expense for you to get together with friends every week to see something new. Now people are in a position where they plainly can't, and the theaters, they won't survive. You're gonna lose regional chains or several theaters out of regional chains, and you're gonna see AMC, the big boy here in the United States, start to close doors. I
feel like we're at the feel like we're watching Sears and Kmart all over again. Yeah. And I don't think enough people are talking about this. Culture, one of the things that worries me is there seems to be a complete wall where the media will not talk about the attendance issue. You're exactly right to point out that the dollars can kind of hide things because of the inflation. And so when you say, oh, it's the worst weekend in decades, it's like, no, it's the worst. This is the worst. This is the worst it's ever been since cinema started. And that's terrifying. But they never want to say how much attendance has utterly crashed. And I think also they don't want to do that because it would indict them, right? They would be indicted for their decisions because none of this had to happen. Culture, walk us through the mistakes that Hollywood made that put us in this position where they've literally crashed their industry.
Well, I mean, aside from the obvious, which, we talk about on the daily, which is the elements of putting in a bunch of nonsense, ideological nonsense in front of story that we talk about all the time. They are less appealing to an audience, on top of the fact that because of the closures that we experienced during the global crisis in 2020, you already were messing with a habit that was going to the theater with your family and friends.
A lucrative habit for the industry, the linchpin of the industry.
Indeed. And unlike the Great Depression, where, the cost of going to a theater was still, something that people could scrape money together to go and see occasionally because there were things to see in the theater that people wanted to see. It was one of the industries that was still, surviving. This time around, instead of the Great Depression or Great Recession or whatever we're going to call this period of time, stagflation and whatnot, you're going to you have to make an appeal to a mass audience, and they stopped doing that. That's their fatal mistake. They stopped reaching out to the average Joe and making something that would be entertaining. They instead of making an inexpensive action movie, they make incredibly expensive message laden, lecture proselytizing film that is not only over the top expensive, but isn't as enjoyable to the mass audience. And they've lost something that I believe you've talked about recently, FOMO, fear of missing.
Oh, yes. And the FOMO 2 culture, though, is the exclusivity, right? So movie stars, once upon a time, were movie stars because they were off in the distance. You didn't know every single thing about them. That exclusivity was broken with social media. It's almost as if every possible bad decision that could be made by Hollywood was made.
And the most important one of those, Pro, and let me know if I'm wrong here, was leaning so hard into streaming, because they've cannibalized the industry in a way that the only thing they can do is go back to creating the artificial scarcity, because I saw something unprecedented just a couple weeks ago. They had a film in theaters for 2 weeks, and then the third week they put it on streaming. That would be The Fall Guy.
Yep. Which The Fall Guy, and this goes back, culture, to this idea that they've destroyed the consumer pattern all across the country, and maybe globally, right? Fall Guy is not a bad film. It's a pretty good film, and it was not able to do anything, and so that should strike absolute fear. And I think Hollywood's catching on to that. I think they're catching on to the fact that they have just about destroyed all of this, and none of this was necessary. They could have done things that would have made them in a stronger position today than in 2018, 2019, but they have made horrible decisions, and we've been sitting here, places like this, places like your channel, saying over and over and over, stop. No. We want entertainment to survive. Stop. And they have not listened, and they have been totally devoted to neo-Marxist woke thoughts and ideologies. And the other thing, culture, this is perhaps the most damaging thing they have, is that they also desecrated their talent pools. Talent pools that had been, these talent pool delivery systems that had been developed over generations, right? Take a look at Disney. This is one example, though, folks. We could give you a dozen of these. In Disney, right, so they had a system whereby art students would go into Southern California, they would go through the classes, they would then be shepherded into Disney animation or other animation, but Disney was the ideal. And then from there, you'd be mentored by people who were absolute experts, going all the way back to the old men. And then what's happened is they have completely destroyed all of that, such that even if they want to create great content now, the studios often can't, because they have removed the pedigree. They have removed the merit, right? The meritorious nature in which they find people. And that's not to say that you couldn't find people of extraordinarily diverse backgrounds to be meritoriously chosen. But it's to say, when you get rid of merit, you can no longer do the things that you once did. And this is clear to anyone who watches sports, right? You can't win the Super Bowl unless you have amazing players. You can't send out a group of JV players into a high school football game or basketball game and typically win, because, well, that's far more difficult. They don't know what they're doing. And I'm sorry, but the people who are in these studios now, they have no idea what they're doing except despising the past. Culture, is it even redeemable at this point?
I mean, it is, but they would have to do the fastest pivot they've ever done. And as you and I have both said and acknowledged on our channos, it takes a long time to pivot studios. It takes a terribly long time. Would the worst Memorial Day weekend in the history of all cinema, would that be a reason to pivot hard? To save your hide, to save your entire industry? Would that be a reason? I believe so. But at the same time, Pro, we have content coming out over the course of the next 6 months, 8 months to a year that's already got all this stuff baked into it. It's not redeemable. Disney went back to the slate.
Gosh, I mean, look, and I hate that it's a good point, because I'm so worried right now about theaters. I mean, I'm genuinely worried.
Well, so development on any project in Hollywood is usually a 3 to 5 year cycle, right? And it just to get from point A to point B. A lot of the studios sped things up, in the late part of the 2010s, right? From probably about 2015 on, they sped things up to produce things faster. Marvel, Disney leaned heavily into that. So maybe they've tightened up the cycle a little bit, but we would be at least 2 years away from new stuff. We know that they are headed for disaster because, again, as Valiant, you, Jonas, myself, Derek Anderson, I mean, all of these people that are featured on your channel and on that Park Place have been talking about the fact that they've doubled down in a way that's going to wreck them further with the Captain America film, which doesn't have Captain America. It has Falcon Cap in it. They doubled down into a story that John F. Trent wrote over on that Park Place about putting the Thunderbolts together without any of the original Thunderbolts members and bringing in a villain that
and
nobody knows.
It's not as if Culture, the Thunderbolts are a popular entity in the first place.
Exactly.
How do you possibly take an obscure piece of lore and somehow make it even more obscure with your own stuff?
Well, and that's exactly what they've done. So that's the problem is right now in entertainment, they've baked in something that again is still just not entertaining to an audience, right? The last good thing I think that Disney made arguably would be Endgame. And everything after that, if you look across the board, whether it's Marvel or Star Wars or anything else, was half-baked at best. And I keep using the word baked for some reason, probably because I'm hungry. But honestly, bro, I think they've kind of sealed their own doom, not just the theater's doom. The theaters can survive. We've had conversations about how, going back to old content, getting some independent things out there, hosting video game tournaments in the theater, stuff like that can bring back, people.
But they need blockbusters, Culture.
I agree with you.
They've got to have blockbuster money to survive. Like, when we've talked about that before, we've done that under the understanding that yes, Hollywood is diminished, but there's still going to be blockbusters.
Well,
we're at epic levels of catastrophe with this latest weekend.
I don't look. Furiosa was supposed to kick off the summer. That's Memorial Day weekend's job. Is you kick off the summer. It kicked
the summer right in the groin.
but
and by the way, Culture, to go back to your food analogy. Yeah. We're living in a world. It's kind of like if every restaurant in the nation decided we're going to deconstruct our menus.
Yeah.
And everybody everywhere went to the restaurant and said, "I'd like a burger, and please actually put it together. I'm sick and tired of seeing my burger, deconstructed into some avant-garde, attack against the patriarch that designed, buns and meat put together." And every restaurant said, "No, you will eat what we give you. It will all be deconstructed." And people stayed home. They stopped going out to eat. That's where we are with entertainment. And if it sounds as ludicrous as I think it does to talk about restaurants that way, that's how ludicrous it has been watching the entertainment industry self-annihilate itself up in flames. Culture, here's the rest of the article. We need to talk about the Garfield side of this.
You bet.
Because it's a particularly disappointing showing for Furiosa. Folks, we all know this was a majorly disappointing thing, and it's going to be a huge loss of money. For Garfield, however, let's end on a sunny note, Culture. For Garfield, which cost $60 million, it's a decent start for a family film while arriving on the lower end of the projections of $30 to $35 million. The movie has already generated $66 million overseas and $90 million globally, so it's well positioned in its theatrical run. Now, what does that mean? Garfield probably needs about $200 million to break even. In its first week, it's at 90. That means Garfield is almost certainly going to make money. It is not a huge blockbuster film.
No.
It did not lead us to the glory land of Memorial Day weekend.
No.
It's not a great start to the summer, but the budget was kept in check, and that means it'll make money. And maybe that's the way forward. I just don't know that that's going to be enough to keep theater doors open. Culture, final thoughts on this Memorial Day weekend, and particularly Garfield. Maybe everything needs to have Chris Pratt in it.
Well, I tell you what, it seems like that if it's an animated feature, it probably will. But look at Mario Brothers and everything else. But
Chris Pratt, Jack Black, Steve Carell, put them in everything.
There you go.
Cruise, everything.
You've got to win there. Steve Carell in particular. By the way, speaking of another animated feature that'll come out that'll do well, is going to be Minions 4. But I'm sure we'll talk about that.
I love Steve Carell. He's such a great guy.
Yeah, but back to it. This was probably one of the most disappointing things was that you really only had two films that made their way into theaters this week. Both of them needed to be a hit. And really, as you pointed out, Garfield really, that's about it. And it's only going to be successful because, yeah, as you pointed out, it didn't cost very much. And it had a pretty decent start internationally, a couple weeks ahead of when we got it this weekend. I would say that going forward, we're going to have to measure not even just the overall grosses, but we need to pay even closer attention to how many butts are in seats, because you're going to see a continuation of elevated ticket prices and concession prices and things like that. If they're pulling in fewer and fewer people, then the system is well and truly broken. I'm going to stop short of saying that it is, but if this weekend was any indication, I think we lose maybe up to a fifth of our theaters that we have here in the United States.
I'm less optimistic, honestly. I think we lose maybe a third. I think this could be awful. But that's what we've been doing, Culture. People say we're negative. People say, oh, you guys, you just want to harp on Hollywood. You just want to be, depressing about Disney. And it's like, no, we're trying to save this. We're trying to be the voice out here that isn't well liked inside the halls of Burbank, but we're trying to be honest and say, we don't want you to become Kmart. We don't want you to become Sears, and you're years away. It's not a decade away. It's very close. Folks, I don't think we're going to have time to get to the AI portion of this. During the pro show today, we might touch on that, but that's the other side that Hollywood has to be looking at, is that there's about to be a democratization of entertainment creation all over the nation, and we'll see how that goes. But Hollywood is, I think, going to become extraordinarily territorial, and there's probably an hour's worth of conversation about how all of that's going to play out. Folks, can't wait to bring it to you. Another thing we can't wait to bring to you is, we're going to be launching a new channel this summer, and Culture Casino, well, he's the guy who's going to be in the lead directing all of it. Culture, congratulations on this new thing we're doing, which will be That Game Place. I'm excited.
I am too. Very excited. I cannot wait. If you're looking for quality gaming content and something that you won't find in a lot of the games, you're a journalist, had to be careful there, journalist space, because that's not normally what I call them. You're actually going to get some amazing video game content and conversations around games, and of course a little bit of gaming snuck in there.
That's right, folks. We've decided it's time to move beyond the confines of Disney and entertainment. And now, a new channel on the way very soon where you're going to see many of your favorite personalities, myself, Culture, Jonas, many more, talking about gaming and gaming news. We cannot wait to bring it to you. Stay tuned. It's coming this summer. Folks, one thing you can help do for us so that we can continue to do what we do and hope we do it well is consider clicking the like button. Share, subscribe, click it, stick it to the algorithms, it's the notification bell, and drop a comment down below. Folks, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.
Say it ain't so. This just in. Disney lost money on another movie. Why, that can't be. I thought that John Lasseter fella over at Pixar was cranking out the latest hits, and Marvel was unstoppable, and Disney princesses were a thing, and Star Wars was a multi-billion-dollar money-making franchise. I overheard you talking about Disney, and wanted to let you know you're really behind the ball. If you were getting great articles from ThatParkPlace.com and subscribe to WDW Pro's YouTube channel, you'd actually be ahead of the culture curve and have entertainment explained.